Okay, before we start, a feature I wanted to announce. I usually try to stay on top of all Torah's new features, and I must have missed this one because I just didn't know about this. But in the Mishnah, okay, we know that in Kaaph's Pirush Mishnayos, he has the Rambam's Gears of the Mishnah, which is many times different from the one that we have in our Mishnayos. So not only do they have the Pirush Mishnah of the Rambam now with the Rambam's Mishnayos, they have the Shelat edition of the Pirush Mishnayos, which means it has all of Shelat's critical footnotes, just like in the Shelat Mishnah Torah. And not only that, but at least on Avos, I haven't checked all the Masechtos, in addition to the Rambam's Pirush Mishnayos, they have a Biur Lepirush Rambam LeMishnah, which is Shelat doing like a Yad Peshutah on the Rambam's Pirush of the Pirush Mishnayos, bringing down all the other Rambam sources with like all this good stuff, and it's just amazing. So thought I would just announce that here. Yes, because there's just I'm just swimming in resources. Yeah, yes.
I'm asking out of curiosity. Do they have the original Pirush Mishnayos or just translations?
So I'm glad you asked. So they have Pirush and Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, and I guess they don't have it on Avos yet, but let's see. I know they have it on Brachos, I think. Yeah. So here's the original Arabic that they have, and they also have the Doofus edition, which in this case is not as bad as the Doofus edition in the Mishnah Torah, because this is like this is just a different translation, but I think it also might not be up to date. Yeah,
is that the one that's in the back of the Gemara?
Probably, yeah. I mean, it is bad in some places because the Rambam continually revised the Pirush Mishnayos also, and I know in Kaaphach what I like about his is that he has which edition of the revision it's from, and he makes sure that like what the Rambam changed, which I'm sure Shelat does also. Yeah, so Rambam goodies. Okay, all right. The other thing I want to do today, before we go on, is I spent a decent amount of time reading through the whole Yad Peshutah on. I think I finished Perek Zion of Vמצה, which is a lot of stuff, and I want to call your attention to some answers to questions that we raised or elaborations. So one of them is, first of all, this is the craziest thing. We're going to start with the craziest thing. So we talked about how the Rambam says mitzvahs asay Torah l'saper b'nisim b'niflas shnasu l'avseim b'mitzrayim b'leilcha misha asar b'nisan shenemar zachor es hayom hazeh asher yitzazim b'mitzrayim, right? And that's the Sippur from Zachor. Then we read in Kriyat Hilchos Kriyat Aleph Gimel, that he says when he's talking about tzitzis, the parshas of tzitzis. Afal pi she'ein mitzvahs tzitzis nohagas b'layla korin osa b'layla mipnei sheyesh ba zikron yitzias mitzrayim u'mitzvah lahazkir yitzias mitzrayim b'yom uv'layla. Right. So we said, what does he mean mitzvah lahazkir? Because he doesn't count it in Taryag, right? So Yad Peshutah says like this. Shocking. Where is it? I'm not going to read this whole thing. Biarti Hilchos Kriyat ma shepazak sham u'mitzvah lahazkir yitzis mitzrayim b'yom v'layla shnemar l'man tiskos yom teischa me'eretz mitzrayim kol mi'achayacha sham hevesi dugmas mishimush hamunach mitzvah. So there I brought examples of the Rambam's use of the term mitzvah benigud l'munach mitzvahs aseh. In contrast to when he says mitzvahs aseh, okay, mitzvah stam mashma maisim meshubach va'afilu kazesh enu mechuyav af midrabanan. So when he says mitzvah, it just means a praiseworthy action, not even a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Okay, and then he says he wrote an essay about this in a book called Sefer Yovel L'Chavod Rav Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik, which I don't know if we have a copy of that, but in his commentary on Hilchos Kriyat, he gives these examples. He says, there's nothing strange about the Rambam using the term mitzvah. So when the Rambam wants to emphasize the virtue of something and its importance, he calls it a mitzvah. This one shocked me, this example. Which shocks me because I understood the Rambam to hold that that's part of the mitzvah of, that he does count mitzvah l'chabit malamdeha v'yodeha. And it's true that the main form of that mitzvah is to honor your Rav. I thought that honoring Talmid Chachamim was part of that. So I don't know why he says mitzvah l'hadro. I mean, unless he's talking specifically about like the type of standing up that you do, but I thought that was the mitzvah d'oraisa. I don't know. Then here's a better example in terms of not being strange. Hilchos mila aleph ches mitzvah lahakdim b'tchilas hayom. It's mitzvah to do mila as early in the day as possible. With hilchos tefillin umezuzah hey beis umitzvah lasos harevach ... stuma. Okay, so I don't really know enough about mezuzah and stuff to know why that's a thing. But so that's just a good principle to know that when he says mitzvah, that just means a praiseworthy action, not necessarily a mitzvah to say. Yeah.
Then you at the beginning of Hilchos Shabbos go through like, or is that just for Hilchos Shabbos? Like his lingo, like when he says like few.
I think that's just for Hilchos Shabbos. Yeah, I don't think he does mitzvah there. I think it's for different lashonos of iser and chiyuv, liability. Yeah, good place to know about though. Like brother mentioned that. Okay, so then next thing that I wanted to point out is, oh yeah. I don't know if you remember this or if I did it too subtly. When we were going through, sorry. First of all, another thing I noticed, sorry, back up. Okay. You know how we always go through the Sefer HaMitzvos before we do the mitzvah in the Mishnah Torah, right? So if you look at the Yad Peshutah on the Koseres, he goes through and he quotes all of the Sefer HaMitzvah formulations. So you don't even have to like look it up in the separate Sefer. And I think he uses Kaaph's translation. So that's just a very, very handy thing to know about. Okay, but anyway, when we went through the mitzvah kuf nun zayin, which is Sippur, I don't know if you remember, I mentioned, the Rambam breaks it down into the topics, and I said that there are 4 and there were 3, and I was like shocked at the fact that I usually have a good memory for these things, and like I was like, I thought that there were, so here's what he says. First of all, he acknowledges that there are 3 topics. Lefi hanusach haniskar le'el shu targum Rav Kafach. So there are 3 topics that the mitzvah of Sippur relates to. 1, hagdalas masha asa banu v'ha'ivosh asa lanu mitzrim. 1 is the magnitude of what the Egyptians did to us in injustice. 2, heach nifra lanu Hashem mehem, how God exacted punishment from them. And 3, hoda al lo yis'ala al kol hachas asher gabanu, giving thanks to God. Okay, but then he says, Baram b'mahaduraso shaharav, I don't know who this is, Rach Heller Zal, a girsa shona b'miktas. So this other girsa says, B'hagdalas masha asa lanu Hashem, the greatness of what God did for us. 2, umasha asa lanu hamitrim evil v'chamas, what the Egyptians did to us in injustice and violence. 3, eich lakach Hashem nikmaso mehem, how God took vengeance on them. And 4, u'b'hodos lo alma shigamanu b'chasadav. So what he does, he says, b'makom Harishon Mofia Etlo Hagdalas Masha Asalanu Hashem, B'makom Masha Asalanu Hamitzrim. So he basically, Kaaphach and this other translator translated differently in terms of that first thing, whether they split into 2 or not. So I don't know what to infer from that, but it's a good example of how like it's very difficult because the Rambam is such a medoctic writer, but when he's writing in the Arabic and people are translating it, you could have differences that like affect your conception of the very tzuras of mitzvah, So just something to note. Okay, next, this other thing, which I, again, just take someone like Rav Rabinovich to point out. Okay, how would you translate l'sapir b'yetzias Mitzrayim, like the verb l'sapir? To tell over. Okay, that's also how I would, like Sippur, right? Okay, so what he says, and again, I'm not saying I'm convinced that this is true, but he knows Hebrew better than I do. And this certainly makes a lot more sense given what we do. Okay, so he says, L'saper, hamashmaus harachava shel hapol saper b'lashon chachamim hisicha kolshihi afilu bein adam la'atzmo. So L'saper in Torah might mean like to tell a story, right? I think that, and I always assume that that's talking about Sippur, which it is. But he says in Lashon Chachamim, in terms of the like Mishnaic Hebrew, it is conversation, any conversation, even between a person and himself. V'lav davka Sippur koros la'acherim, not necessarily telling over events to other people. Kamosha Amru, like it says in Sanhedrin, Lamachas Amud Beis, Adam Harishon B'Lashon Arami Siper. That which clearly doesn't mean he told people reports of things in Lashon Arami. Okay, it means he conversed in Aramaic. Okay, which I don't know what that means. Aramaic conversed in Aramaic. But I thought about this, and if that's true, it is a lot better of a description of the activity of the mitzvah of conversing, discussing Yetzias Mitzrayim, not telling over Yetzias Mitzrayim, especially when you're talking about, let's say, in the Haggadah, when we talk about the Chachamim in Bnei Brak, talking about the halachos of the night. That's not Sippur Devarim. That's conversation, Yeah.
it also makes more sense with like the breakdown that we have with halacha of like, I don't understand if the only mitzvah was for a father to tell a son.
Right.
But the fact that you have like like between yourself, but then also the previous level of like chachamim between themselves.
Right.
Like, no one's like telling over the story to the other chachamim
Yeah.
saying this is what happened.
Right. It's engaging in conversation type talk, but just by yourself. Yeah. Okay. Here's another methodology thing. Okay. So we noted that the Rambam quotes as the source of the mitzvah in the Mishnah Torah, Zachor es hayom hazeh, and then he brings in Bikar to the Bincha just to say that you have to tell your son even if he doesn't ask you. And in the Sefer Mitzvos, he does the opposite, right? So the Yad Peshutah explains, Klomer ikar mitzvah Sippur mefureshes because of Zachor es hayom hazeh asher yitzasem mitzrayim ubo ein zecher lo leben v'lo lacherim. Right, that pasuk doesn't have any mention of a son or another person. Well, korcha shemitzvah mechayeves kol yachid afilu hu boded. Okay, ulam b'sefer mitzvos lo hischabel pasuk. Why? Mipnei shekadarko b'sefer hamitzvos rata lahavi makor b'chazal hamagdir as hamitzvah. That, and he just says it like in passing. I'm sure he writes about this elsewhere. He says because according to the Rambam's approach in the Sefer Mitzvos, he wants to bring the source in Chazal, which defines the mitzvah. Okay, so in other words, we see from here that in the Sefer Mitzvos, he'll bring the source that Chazal cite, but in the Mishnah Torah, he'll bring the one that he thinks is the most pertinent source, even if it is not in the way that Chazal say it. So I want to see if the Yad Peshutah talks about this elsewhere from a methodological standpoint, because here he's just mentioning it in passing. But it seems like a very, very important thing to know if you're going to see different sources in, a discrepancy in the sources. Okay, another thing, and I'm only quoting half of the things I found, by the way, because I don't want to delay too much. Oh yeah, so when you point out to the Ben Tipesh, Kamo Shivcha Zo, Kamo Eved Zeh. So what's your understanding of why we point out like the actual Eved and the actual Shivcha? Yeah.
It was easier to think about in terms of examples.
Okay, that's what I thought also, right? Yeah. Okay. Oh, so here's the thing. So I thought it's easier in terms of having examples, almost like a visual aid, But
what I thought the visual aid would do though is that it would make it more personal.
Okay, yeah. So the Yad Peshutah this might be the same idea, but the Yad Peshutah expresses it more like you did. He says, so this example needs explanation. What Eved are you talking about when you indicate this Eved? So what is the kid supposed to understand about the Geula from the fact that you mentioned the Eved? Maybe this is talking about the event in Psachim, which always seems a little insensitive to me, the event that's talking about. Amrle Rav Nachman the Daru Avde. So this is at the Seder, presumably. Rav Nachman said to Daru, who was his servant, Avda demapik le mare lecherus. If a master set his slave free, the Yahiv le kaspa v'dava, and gave him silver and gold, my bay le marle, what would the servant have to say to him? Amrle, so his servant said, boy l'udu l'shvuche kame. He would have to give praise and shavach. Okay. I just think it's a little insensitive because, I don't think he is setting his servant free. But anyway, Harish Rav Nachman pana le'eved kadei shehala yaspir mitoch nisyono ha'ishi es erka shacheres. So Rav Nachman turned to his servant so that he would explain from personal experience the value of freedom. Sippur ishi kazed, a personal account like this. A personal example like this is going to be likely to make real. I assume lahamchish is a modern Hebrew word for like chush, of like giving them a sense to the young kids about the geula from Abdus L'cheres. So it is more than just a visual aid. It's like the kid knows the servant and you're going to convey that. And this is also why, I have a personal practice, not as a halachic practice, but I usually try for my reading material during Pesach, I try to pick something to read that gives a sense of actual slavery. For years, I would read accounts of North Korean refugees because that is the closest, in my opinion, society to like Mitzrayim now. And then like last Pesach, I started reading the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, and I probably will continue reading it because it's a long autobiography. So like I think that there is definitely a if you can get that from some source and then convey that verbally at your Sippur, I think that is an actual like kiyum of conveying like the personal emotions of someone who actually experienced slavery. Okay, I think the last thing I wanted to mention was we mentioned when we did Machshavah Lab that it's weird that he has Rav and Shmuel, right? And I mentioned that how can you start twice? You can only start once. So how can you paskin like both? So the Yad Peshutah is of the opinion. He says Machshavah Lab. Okay, so he quotes פירוש משנה שם מסו בגנוס שמספר איך היינו, you tell how we were, לפני שבא אברהם, כופרים ומשתפים, that before Abraham came, we were deniers of God and people who worship God in conjunction with other beings. ובחרנו Hashem lo lanachla, God chose us as an inheritance. ואיך עבר עלינו במצרים, מה שעבר, and what transpired in Mitzrayim, ואח כך בדנו Hashem, and then afterwards, Hashem redeemed us, ודרוש עושה הפרשה זכור וידוע. Drush Pasha's Zachar video. Okay, that's okay. Then he goes on. So then he says, Harif be'ipus Rabbeinu Hananel zal Messiah Allah ha'idna avdina kadarbayu. So the Rif is the one who says we paskin like both. Okay. V'kach gam hevi b'pirish mishnayos ashtei adeos. And the Rambam brings both shitos down in the pirish mishnayos. Okay, but then he says like this: V'nir Rabbeinu sover she'in kan machlokes, which I've never heard before. I always thought it was a machlokes. So he holds that the Rambam holds that there's no machlokes. Ulefikach yichid Rabbeinu lashon. Sorry, Rabbeinu. I think this is probably a typo. Lashon maskil u'mesaper. Unless he's saying, no, I don't. Yeah, look, yeah. Maskil u'mesaper l'svaraso shel Rav aval l'shmuel maskil u'modia. So this is an interesting thing. So in the actual halacha, he says ketzad maskil u'mesaper, and then he talks about ovdei avodah zarah. And then for Shmuel, he says maskil u'modia. So who cares? He says v'nir lefarsh kach. Here's how we'll explain it. Kvar re'inu le'el shaloshan Sippur mashma gam sicha shel chachamim. Sicha, we said, means conversation of chachamim. Ba'afilu beinu lebein atzmo. Aval mi sheyesh lo banim ktanim mitzvah lehodia lebanim. But if you have kids, it's mitzvah to inform them. V'hainu shechayiv lehodia lahem dvarim she'enam yeduim lahem, to tell them things they don't know. That's not shayach to chachamim who already know of it. Lefikach masbir Rabbeinu kan after shesim b'halacha v'demis mafilu hayu kulanu chachamim haya levado shoal la'atzmo manishtana hachacham abodid o hachachamim hamasaprim ze'im zeh al ma'alhem l'daber. So if you're a chacham by yourself or you're with other chachamim, what do you talk about? Do you really have to say the event of the story like you do to a dumb kid? So you need to contemplate the spiritual significance, implications of the galus in Egypt, and the geula from there, which led to us getting the Torah. His galis shegila Avraham Avinu Esbal Habira. I don't know what this Tagli's word is. Taglizo hafcha nachlasam shokol Yisrael. Okay, fine. You need to tell about the inheritance of Abraham. Kasher meduber b'sipur hakavana hi lahamik u'laharchiv u'lisbonim b'mashmaos ha'yiruim v'lorak b'prate masim b'vad. So that the intent there is to go into depth and expand on it. Aval misha shesmuchim al shulchano ki'ilu asher adayin inam yodim es ha'avdus ha'historios. But if you are still like dependent on your parents' table in a way where you don't even know the historical events, then that's when you have Shmuel's version. That's why the Rambam starts off with Rav, because that's continuing the thought from the previous halacha about Kulan Chachamim. But in the nusach of the Haggadah, he makes Shmuel's opinion come first. So you need to start with the kids to tell the actual facts. And that's why we start with Avadim Hayinu in the actual Haggadah. Shuv chozrim l'sipur atmo. Harei lekach mat'ima davka daito sharav. Lefikach amru b'shalav zeh mitchila. Yeah. So basically, he holds that there are two components of the Ma'aseh and mitzvah, and it's not a machlokas at all, and that's how you can start the Sippur Chachamim, and you could start the historical account. So I just have never seen that cheat. I was always taught that it was a machlokas. Yeah. Okay. So I guess we didn't have time to start a new thing. Oh yeah. Sorry. One more point. Sorry. I don't know if I mentioned this last time when he says by Rami Obed Avi, v'hu sheyidrosh me'arami Obed Avi ad sheyigmor kol haparsha. But if you look at the actual parsha, we don't finish the parsha. I don't know if this is like a well-known question, but this has bothered me for a long time. The actual parsha starts with Arami Ovid Avi, and it ends with Vayavi'enu al hamakom hazeh. But in the Haggadah, we just say we end here. It goes to Mopsim. So the Yad Peshutah gives a very pshuta answer, which is Pirush Parsha zo yeshba mishum maskal b'nusam. Sorry, that's not the part. This is the part. Zeh amor b'zman shebeis mikdash hayakayam. So the Rambam's halacha is about when the Beis Mikdash is standing. Shemasayim v'yiveinu al hamakom hazeh v'yitin lanu es haaretz hazos eretz avas chalav v'dvash. And then we darshan that v'darshu b'sifri sham v'yiveinu al hamakom hazeh zeh Beis Hamikdash. O yachal zeh Eretz Yisrael kishu umar v'yitin lanu es haaretz hazos hari Eretz Yisrael amor. Umatam alomar v'yiveinu al hamakom hazeh b'schar b'yaseinu al hamakom hazeh nasan lanu es haaretz hazos. But in the Haggadah, Re'ez Sof Hilchos Elu Nusach HaHaggadah, when the Ram brings out the Nusach HaHaggadah, he says, Nusach HaHaggadah Shenahagu Ba Yisrael Bizman HaGalos, V'sham Eno Gomer Es HaParsha, Shari Lo Yitachin Lomer V'hu B'neichar V'yivin El HaMakom B'zeh. So really, halachically, we do darshan the whole thing, but only in Galos do we not. So that just simple answer to the question, which I didn't know about. Yeah, okay.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you, Yad Peshutah. So tomorrow, let's plan to do the halachos about the demonstrating chayrus. Very good.